Next we have up is we're going to be introducing Jesse. He's going to be talking about jumping into Techlahoma, I guess an intro to Scrimba, I think, but I'll let him explain all that.
Yeah, hey everybody. I'm assuming everybody can hear me and see me well. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. All right. So my name is Jesse Heath. Also go by Heathology online, and I am a somewhat new web developer, and I been introduced to the community in a kind of an interesting way. So I'll get to that here in a second. But here's just a little bit about myself, practicing some of the things that I've learned recently about putting objects together. Basically, the only thing that you really need to kind of take out of this screen here is that web development is not really it's not been my career. I was in higher education for 8 years, and I am currently finishing a PhD in the field that I was in, and just different things had happened. And I was teaching on staff, on faculty at a university, and it just wound up number of someone referenced the fact that I have 2 dogs listed in my children. So education, my background was in historical theology. I'd spent 8 years teaching and working in a higher education institution. I had spent almost 15 years studying and doing that, and in and out of church ministries and things like that. And something happened at the university where I was just finding myself in a different position. And I'm currently a part-time minister of youth and families at a church up here in Northwest Oklahoma City. And I really wanted to kind of dive back in to a hobby of mine that I'd had. And I do it on and off. And that was building websites. And basically, I had started building websites using WordPress. That's kind of my go-to. I was using it as a content management system. Everybody, I'm sure, is familiar with WordPress and how kind of a powerful platform it can be, especially if you are familiar with PHP and SQL. And it can be an interesting journey to kind of get through that. But for myself, I want to kind of shift into full-time front-end web development. And so that's how I found myself going through, for example, recently the Free Code Camp's responsive web design certificate, and currently I'm working through the JavaScript and moving forward. So I just want to kind of share a little bit about my journey with you. So in the late 1990s, I was introduced to web development through the Yahoo homepage. Basically, I was just sitting there one night, I looked at it and I saw it, and I wondered how it came together. I was like, how do they do this? And you guys remember how the Yahoo homepage looked like back in the day. It was pretty simplified, right? It was not like it is today, but it was still interesting to me. So I just went down this rabbit hole and started reading articles, reading books, and learning and teaching myself HTML. So fast forward to 2005, I had discovered WordPress as a content management system. And honestly, I was kind of pushed into it because I was working at a church and I was working alongside another youth minister, and we were trying to build a website, and I just jumped headfirst into WordPress. I knew enough HTML, obviously, at that point that I could lay out a page, and I was just getting introduced to CSS, and I just didn't really go further with that. In 2010, I kind of dabbled with with jumping under the hood of WordPress by jumping into PHP and MySQL, but I did not stay into it because I got into higher education and theology. So it's one of those things where if I didn't use it, I lost it type situation. So eventually, in my higher education employment, because I did have experience with PHP and at that point enough exposure to things like CSS and HTML and MySQL, the university that I was on faculty at put me in charge of the online learning management system. If you're familiar with Canvas, it's similar to Blackboard. And that's what I did. And so that required me to jump in and out of SQL to update our instance of Canvas. And so I still wasn't comfortable. I just knew enough to be dangerous. I could open up the SQL file, find the information that I wanted to change, and change it. If you asked me to sit down and write the script from scratch, I couldn't do that. So at this point in earlier this year, around April, I was introduced to Techlahoma by another Techlahoma member named Cal Corbin. And Cal and I go to the same church, and he just happened to come over to my house one day and was dropping something off for me. And we just got to talking, and he had said, "Hey, you should really check out Techlahoma." And he said, given the stuff that you've done with WordPress over the years, how you're familiar with the concept within programming, you could totally jump into this. And he was telling me that there were others like him or other individuals who had jumped in, and within 6 months, 12 months, whatever, up to maybe 2 years or so, they had found themselves in a career change. And I had told him that I had really wanted to jump back into web development and make it something where I could kind of a goal of my wife, and my wife and I have this goal that within 5 years we would like to be able to travel. And web development and coding, in those conversations, he encouraged me and said, that's totally doable. And he said, Techlahoma is an organization here that gives you this environment to learn. It gives you this environment to introduce to other individuals, bounce ideas, but introduce you to a lot of free resources that are out there and resources moving forward. So you're not having to just, completely go back to college and start all over again, which in my case is pretty much impossible since I'm so close to finishing a PhD and there's a lot of money involved. So, as I said earlier, I'm currently working through Free Code Camp's JavaScript certificate, but I'm also doing Meta's. Meta has a front-end development certificate that I found. I just really like the way they present the information. And I'm going to explain why that's important. One of the things you have to do is find your learning style. And if you're not familiar with what learning styles are, very simply, this is the idea that we learn concepts in different ways. How I learn might be different than how you learn. And I think for a lot of people, when you jump into web development or coding at any time, you quickly find out there's a lot of reading involved. And that's one of the specific learning styles, but it's not all of them. And so just take a moment to reflect. How do you learn? Do you know how you learn? And really quickly, I want to introduce you to this concept that being in higher ed, I was introduced to. It's called the Felder-Silberman Learning Styles. And it was developed out by some faculty there at the North Carolina State University. And basically it has, it's got 4 different spectrums. And on the first spectrum, you are either active or reflective. So you learn, what that means is you either learn by doing it and discussing it, explaining it, having conversations about it, or you're reflective, you think about it, you do it alone, you're off to your side. You learn by doing, you learn as a sensor or you're intuitive. So sensors learn facts, where they like to solve problems using well-established methods. They don't tend to like surprises. But other people might be a little bit more intuitive, and the intuitors discover possibilities and relationships. So they're not as concerned about the facts. They don't have to stay according to a map. They can innovate. They tend to not like repeating things. So they like to kind of get creative and get off course a little bit. You could be visual or you could be verbal. Visual learners learn by seeing pictures, diagrams, charts, films, demonstrations, things like that. Whereas verbal learners learn with words. And so that's where a lot of, I think, programming has been for such a long time. A lot of programming tutorials is the visual spectrum here, because it's either visual or verbal. You either learn by written word or spoken explanations. And a lot of tutorials obviously are things that we read. And obviously there's a lot of documentation that we sort through as we're beginning to learn any language. And the final spectrum to look at is the sequential or global. Now, sequential just means that you like to learn things in steps, very logical. Global means you can learn things in chunks, and eventually you put those chunks together and it kind of clicks. So for myself, I'm a very active, sensing, sequential learner. So I have to do things in order. I think things through logically, string them together to kind of form a picture, but I can get lost in the details if I'm not careful. And so, I look at charts, I look at pictures, I read books, but I'm writing on those pictures, right? I make notes in the margins, and I learn by doing. I have to write, I have to do it with my hands in order for it to make sense for me. So if you don't know what your learning style is, I highly recommend that you visit this website, webtools.ncsu.edu. Learning styles, to take the learning style inventory yourself. You can also read more about the learning style by using the QR code or the link, the bit.ly code over there. There's an interesting research that has been published and going through from that university to find out more information about that. So some of the curriculum that I have found helpful because of my learning style
I'm going to give you a 4-minute countdown here. Just keeping you in the loop.
Yep. Some of the curriculum that I have found helpful has been Free Code Camp, obviously. Now, Free Code Camp is still very text-based, right? It's you have this editor that's alongside the right-hand side of the lesson, but that's kind of it. Another one is Course RA, which I'm sure several people are familiar with. But then finally, we come to Scrimba. Now, Scrimba is an interesting platform for me because it kind of puts things in a very interesting format that I can learn through by watching and doing. I just like the way they do it. So let me show you some of the things that Scrimba has. So the Scrimba course library seems pretty interesting, pretty intense for a beginner when you first start, but then you realize there's not a whole lot there. But there's a lot of lessons in each one of these courses. And so you have access in the free program to some of their intro stuff. But if you want to dive deeper, you obviously have to pay for a membership. Now, the one that I want to show you is the front-end developer career path. Now, a lot of us are familiar with some of these career path options that are popping up in different MOOC type environments. And this one, I've just really enjoyed their platform because inside you obviously get introduced to whatever project, whatever lesson you're working on. For example, I'm in module 2, web dev basics, and I'm building a digital business card. So this is still very much in CSS right now, and on this particular one. And I like it because it's video based, yes. And as you know, you can see down here, we hit the play button. It's going to walk us through some of this material. So as we watch the video, what I find very helpful for me is, and his card is going to stay on the screen for such a long time here. I should have double checked it. But basically, he's showing you, obviously, this final product. Now, they use their platform in such a way that they're recording this video. So this is called a scrim. And right now, I could actually start recording a scrim and give another lesson if I wanted to. So you can see here, there's a little red recording dot. It says I'm editing. If I click that red recording, it's going to, hey, do you want to do this? Yes, yes, yes. And it'll start recording. But in the video, I could be typing along and doing anything in here that I wanted to. And this is the video that I'm watching. But as a participant, I can come in here and actually click on the, I could actually click on the environment. Here we go. I can actually click on the environment, and you saw the cursor change from blue to yellow. So this is me actively following along. So they call this pair programming in their environment, which I'm sure we're familiar with in some of our Scratch channel. But here we had the ability to code alongside him. Now we can save that and go back to it later and review it as a note, or we can erase it and just pick right back up with the learning environment itself, which I have found really helpful because of my learning style. Scrimba allows me not only to read, yes, there's some reading involved, but I'm actually visually seeing it. I'm watching an instructor actually do it. He walks me through the principle, and then he gives an example, and he says, all right, now I want you to do this. And I have to program that out on the editor, and I'll run it. If it works, great. If it doesn't, okay. And then he will show an answer after that. That's his solution after that. So Scrimba has been a very interesting, helpful environment for me to continue my learning, given my learning style. So that's me. I'm continuing to put different of my certificate courses and projects that I'm putting together up on my GitHub. Excited about the learning that I'm doing and the connection and the community that I have with Techlahoma. And if you guys want to connect, I may definitely reach out and ask questions, but here you can see my GitHub and my LinkedIn information. So thank you guys.